Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. Whether you are buying for yourself or your business, here you will find tips, techniques and knowledge to support your journey to buying smart. Interviewing business owners and technical experts to give you information and guidance before parting with your money. Save money, time and get what you want when you want it. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this episode, I'm delighted to introduce you to Ben Clear, the Managing Director of CRB Building and Roofing. I've worked with Ben, particularly as a roofing contractor, for at least 6 years. Ben is someone who focuses on the customer first to build trust and positive relationships. He seeks to develop workable, practical and economic solutions for all projects, whether they are repairs, refurbishments, renovations or rebuilds. Ben acts as the project manager and customer liaison to ensure excellent and clear communications are established to reach and exceed the expectations of the customer. So, hello, Ben, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very looking forward to this one. Should be some good fun tonight and hopefully some very interesting information for our listeners.
Hopefully so, yeah.
Okay, been looking up CRB, obviously. Even though we've known each other for a long time, it's good to familiarise yourself with your website and such. And obviously, it's a family company, started with a very interesting beginning and thereafter a solid business growth. Perhaps you could spend a few minutes telling the listeners about yourself and CRB.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a family company in the most traditional sense, in that my father started the business in 1979, which is actually 3 years before I was even born. So it's been around a while. He wasn't a roofer per se, but had a background in engineering, and had an issue whereby he couldn't really afford to pay a roofer to replace the roof on his own home. So he set about went to the library, got books, started researching exactly how roofs went together, and learned a bit of domestic roofing. Replaced his own roof on his house in Eastbourne quite successfully, and within a few months or so had replaced several other roofs in the same road, working his way along with neighbours, giving him other projects to look into. And it built from there, and he had several sort of periods of growth. He was around for the 1987 storms, which hit the southeast fairly badly and gave him another acceleration point. And he's a canny fellow who sort of learned to follow his nose over the years, and ended up with quite a good sized business at the end of it. I came along in 2005, I believe it was, spent probably quite a few years trying to avoid working for my father, and promised I never would, but had regularly worked on the tools and tried to shy away from it, and always thought, it was the worst thing in the world to go and take over my father's company. And yet here I am, many years on, doing exactly that. But it's funny, isn't it? It's funny what you're actually good at. Turns out, quite often isn't the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. And I had a set of skills that lent themselves to doing it, and I enjoyed it. I liked the technical side of the business and the business side of it as well. So I ended up starting as contracts manager, and eventually taking over completely. And I'm now sort of sole shareholder and director. So it's been a sort of progression over the years. So.
All right, brilliant story, fantastic, and certainly 1987 must have been a hell of a good boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So CRB has a refreshing, customer-focused outlook, and you're not shy of clarifying that on your website. Can you tell us what makes CRB different to other roofing contractors, though?
Yeah, so I have a policy of always trying to listen first and try and understand what is somebody actually asking you for. So that might be really obvious. Obviously, you've got a great big hole in your roof and there's water pouring in. I think it's pretty evident to everybody involved what somebody is after. But we're a building and a roofing company, as the name suggests, and we do fairly significant size projects. And quite regularly, people will give you a bit of a bum steer and tell you something what they want, or they're very literal and tell you about the color of the wall or whatever it might be, and they're not really getting to the the root cause of the problem, which is sort of my obsession, is to try and find out why is somebody doing something, what's their reasoning and motivation to have you standing there in front of them, why were you called specifically. When you understand that, you can really start to give the person what they actually want, even if that's not what they're asking for. You can translate it into something that makes much more sense. And I think that's our secret, and it shows that we're listening, because we're asking lots of good questions. And it's I don't think good schedules of work and good quotes come from just the client's obviously input. They really need the contractor to give as much as, or if not more, into that process.
Yes, it's obviously they're not skilled and competent to know necessarily what's the wrong, other than the fact they've got water dripping through, I guess. But,
Exactly.
yeah. But obviously, a roof that's damaged is a bit scary. It's not my area of competence either. So finding and engaging a roofing contractor can raise worries for many people. Obviously, nobody wants any problems or delays, poor quality work, and obviously spiraling costs. So, what are your recommendations on how a buyer should go about identifying qualified roofing contractors in their areas?
So I always say referral. So of course you can use different federations and other sort of pre-qualifiers, but the best thing you can do is find somebody that you trust, who has found somebody they trust, and if that is an absolutely key way to find reliable people. It's got to come from a good person, but it's also got to come from someone who's asked them to do something similar. There's no point, saying I need somebody to come and fix my roof, and they recommend you a really good plumber. Somebody's got to understand and have competence in that area. But a referral is absolutely key, and it follows on. We obviously need subcontractors as part of the works that we do. We've got our own staff, but we've got contractors as well, and we call it kissing frogs. You're forever trying to sort of kiss frogs to find princes, and when you find them, you hold on to them. So partly it's referral, but the other part is keeping and holding on to good contractors so that you've got loyalty there from them when you need them as well.
Yeah. You mentioned then about accreditations in some respect. Just thinking now, for somebody who perhaps they may be a young couple and they have a problem, they've moved into a new property, they may not necessarily have a sort of portfolio of contractors they're familiar with, and particularly if they've moved out of area, as we're more transient these days with obviously new jobs and such. So if you're looking for sort of recommendations on the qualifications, the accreditations and memberships those people should be looking for, can you tell us what are those accreditations that people should keep an eye out for? What do they mean? And how does the buyer confirm that contractor is actually currently registered and engaged and approved by those federations, let's say?
Yeah, so it's not probably as difficult as it once was, with the internet being sort of so easy to use. So trade federations are probably your best starting point, because that's where the technical competence comes in. So nearly all of the trade federations, and on the roofing side, you've got the National Federation of Roofing Contractors, the most prominent one in the UK. And on the building side, Federation of Master Builders are the one with the highest membership levels. And again, all of those federations have an auditing system where they're checking on the members. They're not just checking that they've got the right insurances in place and things, but they're also doing physical inspections on site of their completed projects. It's not a perfect scenario, because I'll explain probably a little later on. Some of my work with the Federation of Master Builders brings me across some quite bad situations where even when people have been vetted, things can go wrong. But it's a very good starting point. And the really important thing is they've got these ADRs, these alternative dispute resolution processes. So if you do have a problem with somebody as part of one of those trade federations, you've got something to lean on, and those complaint handling teams are going to be able to help you, and they'll be very much on your side to help you out through the other process. And if the member really has done something terribly wrong, they will be reprimanded, removed, advised, whatever it takes to resolve that. It's not a perfect science. Those federations are just complaint handling teams, but in my experience, most of them have surveyors that will actually go out and inspect projects, and that will tell people quite quickly whether the work's up to scratch or not. So and the other way of those are very easy to check. So all of those will have an online register. You can go along and pop our name as a building or roofing company into any of these federations and very quickly find out if we're a current active member. And if that person's been removed as well, there's typically a list on the website, and their name will flag on a Google search to show that there's somebody who's been thrown out of that federation, which would obviously be a very good warning flag. So yeah, there's ways and means, but trade federations is your starting point.
Okay, that's interesting that at least there's some teeth there to be on your side, so to speak, without going down, let's say, the legal route, as maybe
Absolutely.
people fear.
Yeah.
Okay, let's imagine now that a buyer has found a short list of contractors. How do you think they should go about choosing who would be the right fit for them?
Yeah, so I'm a personal believer in always putting people first. And if you can work with the person that's standing in front of you and you've got a good feeling about them, then you should be able to tell whether they will help you and deliver when things go wrong. So an honourable person will make an honourable decision, even if it costs them financially or professionally. They will make the right choice. So first of all, the person is the most important person. I've had experience with some quite large organisations before, real household names, where the person in front of me has been superb, but the actual organisation behind them has performed really badly. So it's not a perfect science, but it's at least you'll know your direct contact is going to be with somebody you trust. I'd also suggest not being afraid of higher prices. So there's so many disputes start from a root of a low price that should have been higher in the first place. And I think buyers should always be very wary of low prices and not be afraid to pay a higher price for a good service. It's going to make their life so much more pleasant in the end that it's money well invested, because a building or roofing project gone wrong is everybody's nemesis. It's not going to serve you well. You're going to lose hours, time, stress, sleep. So having the right price for the right person, I personally would always pay whatever the price is within reason if I really want that person. And that business is going to follow in the ethos of the person. It's very unusual for a business not to really reflect the person that you meet within reason.
Okay, so obviously rapport then is quite an important factor. So
Yeah,
obviously you're
absolutely.
engaged with their person who I guess is your front of house for your business, basically. So if you don't have a connection there, then perhaps it might be difficult in the future for any discussions that take place.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you're comfortable with the person now. It looks like the company appears to be of the right stature and the right accreditations. There's always the point there where you need to be comfortable. I certainly need to feel comfortable that the quality of the works they've done for other people and the service they've provided has been there as well. So how do you verify that those things are in place before you commit to any work? What's the best way of going about that?
Yeah, so if you started from a referral basis, that's brilliant, because essentially you've got
absolutely.
one ready-made reference immediately. But taking up other references is always worthwhile, especially the first time you've worked with somebody. I mean, once you're one or two sort of jobs into a process and you've used someone before, obviously you're going to feel confident. You probably wouldn't take up references even the second time. But taking up a few references at the beginning is important, and try and take them up for projects that are similar to yours. We will always give you an indication if that contractor is used to doing that sort of work. So are they a fish out of water, or are they absolutely in the right area for you? And I'm not saying that contractors can't learn new skills and take on new projects, but it's reassuring to know that they've obviously in the right area and field of works. Those references, I would always say, need to be really up to date as well. It's one of my sort of bugbears. Is if somebody asks me for a reference for a project, I'm always happy to give one. I need, as a contractor, to be able to say, here's 3 or 4 from the last few weeks or months, not one from a year ago that was quite positive. I should, yes, of course, we've all got a list of things, that we all keep those things, that nice things that people have said about us, but there's no point showing somebody those from 6 years ago or something.
Yeah.
I always suggest people go and see an active project as well. I think that's a really good one. Go and
Good
see
point.
the lads on site. Go and see how clean and tidy the site is. Go and see the clients that we're working for. See what they've got to say about us quietly in the garden later on or something. It doesn't have to be in front of us, but meet people we're actively working for and look at one of our active projects, and it will tell you pretty much everything you need to know about that person. If you turn up and that site's an absolute dog's dinner and there's crisp packets blown all over the place and there's coffee cups everywhere and there's only two blokes around and they don't seem interested and they're kicking a football around in the garden or something, you're going to get your answer pretty quickly, no matter how good the quote was. If it's not followed up on site, then you've got your answer.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that, because people shouldn't really feel threatened about doing that. In fact, the builder should be, quite positive and engaged that's taking place, because it really shows that potential client is really interested in them, I think.
Yeah, and they
Obviously,
should have
people
some
are
pride in
shy.
what they're doing. Yeah,
Absolutely. People shouldn't be shy about checking these things out, because you're about to spend possibly a significant amount of money on a job.
Yeah,
So you've got to be,
absolutely.
pretty sure what you're doing.
Yeah, I
Perfect.
completely agree, and that's it. And you should never forget that it's your money you're handing over, and you should never feel, shy or intimidated about asking for the right references. And a good builder will not, or roofer will not be upset about providing that in the slightest. It will be completely normal for them to provide that. And if they start sort of messing around and not offering up references in a timely fashion, then that's another warning sign straight away.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, if it's obviously it's a straight repair, then that's pretty easy. But quite often, I guess people are having extensions and changes to their roof, so that perhaps they're developing another room in the attic or whatever the case may be. So, how does a buyer, how are they best to explain their requirements in a way that the contractor is clear on the brief? So, what would you like to see, and how would you go about making sure that your understanding of what the buyer needs and wants is exactly what they think they need and want?
Yeah, so verbal discussions are a good starting point, obviously, and that's where everyone's going to begin. But what's really important is you're testing the listening skills. So if contractors going to reproduce those discussions in a format that you can understand easily, then it's a big green tick for the communication, and that's a good sign for the rest of the project. Larger projects always would have a detailed schedule of works. Many contractors like us will take all of your requirements and put those into a comprehensible schedule of works. And I always use the example, it might say, don't let the cat out or something. Someone's priorities might be quite different to what ours are as a contractor, but it shows that we've listened and we've demonstrated that we've listened. We haven't just said, oh, that's fine, we won't let the cat out the back door whilst we're refurbishing the back of the house or something. But it's essentially making people's life as convenient as possible by having listened to all of their requirements, and that will really help loyalty and repeat business as a business if you can really understand people.
Okay. It was quite interesting when I was obviously reviewing your website, looking at terminology. One of the things that you refer to is you provide a schedule of works, or PC sums, rather than perhaps what most people expect is the word quotation. Can you explain the difference between those offer methods, and what are the pros and cons for the buyer of each of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something that's evolved over the years. So my father, when I took over the business room, was absolutely adamant it must always be called an estimate. If you call it a quote, it's a fixed price, and people will expect the project to complete exactly to the penny that you've provided. I didn't really like that but I also understand if you do call everything a quote, then you have to factor in a degree of risk, because if that project changes and people have the anticipation of a fixed price, you're at every single price that you're putting out factoring in that increased risk and therefore being a slightly higher price. My approach is slightly different. I say, let's take all of the needs and the wants and all of the must-haves, put them into a detailed schedule of works, which later on generally we redraft multiple times before we start a project. But in doing that, I'm able to say exactly what we're doing. Each one of those items is a fixed cost. That's saying that is what it will cost to do this item, whether it be the roofing, the plastering, whatever it might be. And in general, a domestic project, a good sized one, will have somewhere between about 150 to 200 items on the quote. So it's very, very detailed. But we're trying to be exhaustive. We're trying to put everything in that possibly has been discussed or might be wanted, and then adding things that we think you may also want to place it in there. And accepting the fact that because it's itemized, you can cherry pick it, you can edit it down. And when things aren't agreed yet, like, the cost of door furniture is a favorite one. No one's going to select door handles before they start their project. So we put a PC sum against it. So we put, we've allowed £120 plus VAT per doors, for example, including door furniture. And it means we've got something to work with, and it's a very honest, transparent way of working. So, and you as the client have got a really good idea of what's happening in the budget. So we'll do additions and omissions off the end of that and keep updating the client regularly with that document, but we don't change the original document. So it's very, very clear what's being added or taken away. And they can then make decisions. So we have projects that might say lose £10,000 in the ground is a worst case scenario, but it happens. We've had a project do that very recently on a big chalk hill, and the house name was actually Chalk Hill, and we didn't find any chalk in the foundations at all. So there was quite a lot of clay actually on this big chalk hill. And that made for deeper foundations than the engineer and I had designed, and therefore led to increased costs. So when those things happen, having a good schedule of works in place means that we've been able to go back to the project through the later stages that we haven't got to yet, and make amendments and make suggestions and ways that we can basically try and bring that back in on budget. But the client can see what we're doing with that because the document is there, it's transparent, and we can all see it and work with it. So and it's a really nice, honest way, and it's reassuring when someone prices like that, because if something changes and the client says, right, well, I no longer need the kitchen fitted, for argument's sake, they'll know straight away by looking at our document what they've just saved. They won't necessarily know that with a lump sum quotation or a builder that puts 5 or 6 lumps in a quote even. But with 200 odd items, you can be pretty certain what you're going to save or what you're going to add. So yeah, it's a different approach, but for us, it works really well, and it's part of that sort of good communication and the honest, open approach as well. It sort of fits in with our ethos.
Yeah, that sounds a really good idea. I like the principles there. If you happen to be in a lucky position and you have a number of different contractors that you've vetted and feel quite comfortable with, what would you say is a reasonable number of offers that you should seek? Is it, just go with the one you think, but if there's a few, would you go for 2 or 3 or even more? Is it depending on cost, or what is it?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say about that is this the first time you've purchased with that business? So if it is the first time you purchased that business, you've definitely got to cost check them. I think that's fair enough, and you're not really going to understand, whether they're whether they are luxury budget or basic budget kind of people necessarily, and you wouldn't tell that from the car or the van they turn up in either. You need to know what those prices are. Once you've got the measure of somebody and you've done a project with them, it's quite a different approach, I'd say. But on the first instance, I'd say I wouldn't be seeking more than 3. But if one of the quotes is terrible, then I would factor that in and go and try and get 3 good quotes in before you've selected the person. Again, personality comes into it hugely. So if you feel they're going to really give you a good service, then don't be afraid to pay more. I would never ever support the 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it might be, scattergun approach to getting quotes in. Just because they're free doesn't mean you should add them. What you're actually doing is burning your bridges with lots of people that won't want to come back and quote. And some contractors, if they don't win the first quote, that's the last time they're going to come and see you, essentially. So you could have a reasonably good contractor that you've basically cut off your list in the process of getting multiple quotes. And some businesses obviously will have policies where they say they must get 5 quotes before they can raise a purchase, and if that's the case, then you need to be cautious as well. And I would certainly never let the contractors know that's the case, that you're getting more than 3, because I think most contractors would be the end of their interest in the project, essentially.
Right.
And certainly on the domestic side, I think I've often said, getting lots of tenders doesn't necessarily select the best price or the lowest price. normally selects the person who's paid the least attention and has accidentally underpriced it. And that is the beginning of such a bad end to the relationship and the project. That is really where things go wrong. If builders run out of money, roofers run out of money, it's a disaster, really. It's terrible thing to try and extrapolate yourself from once it's happened. So yeah, not being dazzled by the cheap price is important, but also picking that right person and not using the scattergun approach if it's avoidable at all.
Yeah, that's some good advice there. It's always a challenge, certainly as a buyer, when you receive multiple quotations, let's say. And it's difficult sometimes to evaluate one offer against another because they can be laid out very differently. Other than price and perhaps the personality of the individual you've been dealing with, have you got any other a few recommendations on what to be looking for?
Yeah, so um, having lots of quotes in, first of all, is part of the issue, as we previously said, because if you've got lots, that makes it harder to choose. Also, all the different layouts and formats that people offer, and all of their sort of different ways of skinning the cat, as it were. So you might have the same problem, but they've all come up with different solutions, can be even more confusing. So if you've got that sort of hopefully a narrow list, you factored in references that you've taken up, you factored in the personality and the rapport you might have with the person that's come to see you, you would also then start to interrogate those quotes and ask questions, and it doesn't do any harm at all to contact people and check what's included or what's excluded if it isn't clear. I would be very wary of people's approach when they turn around and say, oh yes, that's included, oh yes, that's included, oh yes, that's included. There's why, if it was included, had they not been explicit about that in the quotation? And I think, yes, it might be obvious that they will take away their own rubbish, for example, but there's no reason you wouldn't ask and check that. If one contractor is quite clearly stating all rubbish will be removed via a skip we're going to place on your driveway, then and the other person is saying nothing about that, you wouldn't be wrong to assume that they may just be leaving that rubbish on your driveway and telling you to take it to the local tip or something, and that's why they're £280 cheaper than the next person. So ask lots of questions, but be very careful about how you receive the answers. And blasé answers aren't good, and wide-ranging answers aren't good. Specific answers where someone you can tell considered it originally will help you decide, because someone who paid proper attention to your quote is going to pay proper attention to your project.
Yeah, good advice. Okay. Now, thinking of those significant works where there could be some weeks of time when the contractor's on site, how should the buyer monitor and evaluate that progress has been achieved on plan and to budget and in accordance, with the brief?
Yeah, so there's a way of getting the detail and timescales up front. So you can ask for those quite regularly. Contractors won't put, I expect this to take X amount of weeks or days or months, whatever it might be. I think as contractors, we're all quite nervous about doing that because we don't quite know what the limitations on the project might be, what the access is going to be given to us. These things are generally discussed after the contract may have been won, and that can slow us down or speed us up depending what's happening. And we're wary that if we put the project will take 8 weeks and it's completed in 7, quite often clients will turn around and say, well, that must have gone quite well for you. So, and they'll be expecting some form of discount because of it. Now, in some cases, that might be possible depending on how the project's worked out and how you've costed it. But in reality, it doesn't allow for the fact that you might have had certain days, 3 or 4 people on the project more than you expected or something similar, and it's jogged a certain part of it on quicker. So I would be wary of timescales, but it certainly helps to ask for them at the beginning of the project. Some people will give you very strict timescales, like we expect to be up to DPC by this point, we expect to top out the roof at this point, that sort of thing. But they're not always particularly helpful, and weather being what it can be in the UK, then it's some of them go out the window very early on. Yeah. We do beautiful programs of work with everything absolutely detailed, but they're more of an order in which things are going to happen than exact days they're going to happen on. So yeah, asking for clarifications and getting as much of that in place as possible and asking as many questions will help you assess that early on.
Okay. One of the things that's becoming a lot more prevalent now is health, safety, and the environmental aspects of works. And there are some differences between commercial and domestic works. Can you explain what those differences are with respect to this type of work?
Yeah, so you have quite different responsibilities as either a commercial or a domestic client. Something called CDM 2015, which is the Construction Design and Management Regulations that were produced by the HSE, have tried to address this as clearly as possible. But certainly on the domestic side, my experience is that people have sort of very little interest or knowledge of what their responsibilities are. So um, it is fairly straightforward. You do have responsibilities to ensure the project's been planned safely. So that's given people adequate time to produce the right type of paperwork and information. And you can't place undue stress on them to do something that they wouldn't consider is safe or reasonable. So that you'll need to engage with them in terms of how you're going to keep the site safe and all those sorts of things. But typically on the domestic setting, you are able as the client to allocate those responsibilities to the contractor. Most time it's done sort of tacitly without the contractor necessarily confirming they've done that, because most contractors assume they are going to take those responsibilities. Of course, they're going to generate a phase plan or a method statement and site specific risk assessments for your project. But they may not, on the domestic front, share those documents with you. On the commercial side, much more likely they're going to send those documents to you in advance and say, what do you make of this? If you've got any comments, let us know. On the domestic side, they probably won't share that information with you. Generally, we would share the site-specific information with them, because it can literally be like, we're going to be doing deep excavations. We don't want your children to be in the garden at any point during this project. And when we leave, that back door needs to remain locked, not that's now over a 3-meter drop or something. So we're trying to communicate those things, not just on site and by putting signs up or locking doors and things, but communicate it up front so people start to make plans, think, oh crikey, what, we are going to lose the garden for the summer or for a month or two here, whatever it might be, depending on the project. So there are responsibilities, but generally it's the as a domestic client, you can quite easily apportion these to the contractor, and there's a lot of information on the HSE website about how you do that. So I would emphasize, go onto the HSE website, read about CDM. It isn't quite as boring as it sounds. It will give you some pretty succinct information pretty quickly, and it's important stuff. If you've got a contractor who really isn't paying much attention to these things, people can get hurt, and it quite often the people that do get hurt can be the clients or homeowners or their children or their visitors as well. So do pay attention to it, and it's a good way of also vetting the contract, to go back to previous conversations, because if they really don't produce the right type of paperwork and the right information, there's a good chance they're not a particularly good contractor. And if they don't really care about these things, about people being safe and not getting hurt, and they treat health and safety in a blasé kind of way, that will let you know quite quickly you probably shouldn't be working with them.
Yeah. So thinking of paperwork, there's probably some other things that we could or should consider that we should have received or should receive either with the quotation or at some point in the dialogue. And I'm thinking of now perhaps insurances, terms and conditions. You mentioned the schedule of works, etc. So what kind of things should we also think of that should be at least in your hands or have been visible to you before you jump in?
Yeah, so most contractors are going to have some form of terms and conditions that are going to be attached to that quote when they send it to you. A lack of any kind of small print actually might seem attractive, but probably should be avoided, because at least it shows that there's some basis for a contract to be formed. So on a domestic side, on the most part, people aren't going to form one of them, the recognised contracts. There's a few around, so the clients may have heard of things like JCT contracts, which we'll often use for a building contract. There's also the Federation of Master Builders have produced a plain English contract, which is quite flexible and easier to use for some people. If you don't have a contract like that, which is a separate, complete paper document normally that everyone has signed, witnessed, and agreed certain terms in, then you've got to rely on the contractor's own information and any email exchanges or letters you've exchanged. So one is you need to make sure those exchanges happen in writing if you're adding, because they're forming part of the contract if there isn't a formal contract in place. But a detailed schedule of works, or at least a detailed quotation, terms and conditions from the contractor to say, what kind of terms they're going to keep, what sorts of things they're going to do, and what their performance is going to be, and things that they would expect you to do as well. Some form of order form, I think, is always a good sign. So signing, giving you something to sign that says you're accepting these terms and conditions will work okay. And then any product specific information. So is there a certain product or something they're showing to you that they want to use? If it's a visual thing, we'll often provide that up front. So if it's a type of roof light or something that we've mentioned to you in the quote, we'd like you to know what it looks like. But technical information like guarantees and documents and things like that for products, we'd always package up and hand over at the end as like a handover package. So yeah, those are the sorts of things I'd be looking for up front.
Yeah. Just think of the insurance cover. What kind of level of cover you think in the millions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you've got a roofing contractor coming out to fix a hole in your roof or something, 1 million is even sufficient. They always sound like really big numbers, but we've had lots of discussions recently around this because we have 10 million public liability cover. I dread to think of a claim that could ever get anywhere in excess of 5 million, which is the next stepping point down. The next stepping point down generally is 2 million, and then it's 1 million, which is the really basic forms of insurance. 1 million is for your one-man bands type territories, probably not even employing an apprentice or anything else. 2 million up from there for most of your generic small builders and roofers. And then I say 5 million for anyone doing proper contracting, really. Anyone who's doing projects in excess of 50, 60k, I'd expect them to have 5 million. And then the larger contractors, or people who have specific risks, so they might work in schools, colleges, other buildings that might have a high value, or it could be very detrimental to that business if you didn't perform for some reason, should really be carrying 10 million. But you should be quite sure about what that insurance is for. And of course, it's for the builder, not for you. So there's a very different type of insurance that you need to be considering as a domestic client. If you read the small print of your own domestic home policy, it'll almost certainly say if you're having building work done, you should notify us. They'll generally ask for an increased premium for that to increase the additional risk. If you don't notify them, there is an opportunity for them to repudiate a claim should there be one, and then they won't cooperate with that contractor's insurance company as readily as they might have done, because they'll just lean on the contractor's insurance. Well, that contractor's off and working on another project by this point. He's left a disaster behind him. So is that going to serve you best? No, your home insurers are going to serve you best as you're their client. So making sure your insurances cover you for the types of work you've got in mind are an important point. And we often ask people to take out separate insurance policies for that purpose, if it's a larger project as well, to actually name the job and what we're doing and acknowledge the schedule of works, so that there's a very clear idea that if there was a problem, everyone's insurance companies would work together to resolve it.
Now, that is excellent advice. I think there are many people who won't even consider needing to talk to their own insurance company. They'll be expecting that to all be covered by the builder's insurance. So I think that's really a crucial point for people to be aware of. Brilliant. Thanks for that. Thinking about the contractors where perhaps there's a large amount of work to be done, perhaps they, for whatever reason, have a gap in their expertise, or their teams are unavailable on different jobs. What responsibilities does the contractor, the primary contractor, hold when they're engaging subcontractors to protect the buyer?
Yeah, so it's obviously incredibly common in the building industry that employees will actually be subcontractors, and most companies like my own will have a mixture of people that are employed directly by the company and subcontractors. Any good contractor who's bringing other contractors onto your site should have a really good PQQ system in place. So that's a pre-qualification questionnaire. So that means that we are checking that they've got insurances in place. So if there's a disaster, again, that all the insurances are syncing up and working together. We're checking that their accreditations are in place. So, if they're a plumber, are they a gas safe engineer, qualified engineer? Have they been recently vetted? Have they, with electric, it will often be NIC, EIC, those sorts of things. Generally, most contractors like us will obviously have partner contractors they work with day in, day out. And most of ours, our scaffolding company we've been working with longer than I've been alive. So there's some of those relationships are so well tested that you feel much more relaxed about them. But it doesn't mean we don't check their insurances every year, just in case there's an issue, a lapse, or occasionally there might be a slight term change in terms of the height limits they're allowed to work at or something, which suddenly might affect you. So you have to read these things and make sure that you have a good process in place to vet those contractors. And the other thing you try and avoid is what I call the sub sort of analogy, where you end up with, we might subcontract a portion of the works out. We're going to be very clear about what that is, and we would never hide that from a client. We'd be quite honest about it. But what we don't really like to see then is that subcontractor subcontracting it out to somebody else again, because for want of a better expression, the arse is getting further from the elbow all of the time, and the people who end up on site might not really care about you and your client and your business. Whereas if it's my chaps who, I've been to their weddings and christenings and everything else, and we're all friendly and know each other well, there's a responsibility there to each other to perform, and that disappears the more diluted it gets, and it goes down the chain. So it's fine to subcontract, and it's fine that your contractor may subcontract the works, but if they're wholesale letting out the entire project to somebody else, I would be concerned that they're not interested in it, or they're not going to supervise it well enough.
Yeah, that's good. Just thinking about the communications, we've touched on that a few times now. And if it's a fairly large job going over a span of time, how frequently do you think there should be a formal gathering of the client and the contractor to assess how things are going? What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, so we always say once a week, and we try and always set the same time in the diary. So we've got about 5 projects going on at the moment, and some are sort of towards their beginning and some are towards their end. And we have a set time each week for them to meet, and that site meeting will often involve me as the owner of the company and who's leading the way on design, technical and cost side, basically. And then my site manager, who will be whoever's the day-to-day contact for that client, will be there as well. But we'd also ask for the client's plural to be there as well. So if it's a husband and wife team or a couple, then we'd expect them both to be there. It's not always easy, and you do have to work it around people's work commitments, obviously. But we try and pick a time that everyone can do right at the beginning, and we try and set it in stone in the diary for that time every week. It's very difficult if a client wants to sort of stray from that and starts cancelling it and moving it and messing around with it. You lose really valuable time, because what it does is it gives you planning and preparation time. So we're saying, discuss this and this at this site meeting. If that's getting missed off, then often we're missing trigger points for getting things ordered or getting design decisions. And also it's when you're getting the most out of your builder, because if they're just building it straight directly from the plans, they're not really interpreting your needs well enough, and there'll always be design changes made on site. And we will discuss those with people directly and really come up with good, ingenious solutions if we work together. So it's often the good bit of the job, really. That meeting is the way of really taking an average job into turning it into something that someone's really delighted with at the end of it. So at least once a week, if not more. And nowadays with technology, it's a lot easier. Obviously, we're doing Zoom meetings with clients where we need to, but we're also, we always set up a WhatsApp group now, which includes the electrician, the plumber, the roofer, the site manager, myself, and the clients, that everyone can share information on there. And it might just be, I've put a key in a key safe outside or something for tomorrow, or it might be, here's a picture of my friend's beautiful TV cabinet that I've seen that I want you to replicate for me, or whatever it might be. It's a good way of sharing information, technical and images and videos even. And we can, in those meetings where we can't get clients to them for whatever reason, we'll even bring them in on Zoom, on the phones, or a WhatsApp video call or anything it might be, to show them what's going on. So yeah, at least once a week, but the more the better, really. The better the project, the more of that time you give to it, the better the project will be.
Yeah, it's a really good point, particularly when I guess the client is perhaps at times remote. They may want to go away for a period of time, or this might be a second
Absolutely.
property for
Yeah.
them, and etc. Yeah, so yes, it's good using those sort of media. It's very good. What was the challenges though? In your experience, where can projects often go wrong? How do you and the buyer mitigate the potential issues?
Yeah, so we've touched on a couple of those issues already. I should explain that one of my roles is at the Federation of Master Builders on their National Standards Committee, and the work that I do with them. It's been about 6 years now. I've sat on that committee, and we essentially we're the last stop in the road of the disputes resolution process. So if the builder in this case hasn't performed, and they haven't been able to resolve it with the client, we have the power to remove them from the organisation completely, or to warn them, or over time we've developed a few other elements like compulsory training. So we'll say, right, you've fallen down on this, this and this, but if you did go off and do this training within the next 3 months, then we may reconsider your membership. So with that role, I've seen literally hundreds of collapsed projects essentially, and I've got a very good understanding of where they do go wrong, and why they go wrong. And there's absolutely two key things for me over the years that I've seen. One is miscommunication. So if there's a lack of detail in the quote, there's clients will regularly assume things are included that the builder absolutely assumes are not, and people will fall out about those things because they cost money. So it could be a £2 thing, which probably no one's going to fall out about, or it could be a £5,000 thing that the client assumed was in, but the builder did not put in for. So having lack of detail in the quote will create some of those things. So a good quote eliminates some of that stuff, but having really good interaction at that purchase stage, like we were discussing earlier. So asking those questions of the builder and understanding what they have included and what they have excluded, and what their priorities are, will hopefully avoid some of those clashes later. But the more detail, the better, essentially on that front. The other one is, which clients are almost sort of solely responsible on their own to some degree, is selecting outrageously cheap quotes. If you get 4 quotes, for argument's sake, which would be against my sort of advice, but if you've got 4 or 5 quotes, and one of them, say they're all in the remit of 50 to 70,000, and one comes in at 30,000, discount it immediately. Don't entertain it. And it's so difficult. The human brain keeps returning to that figure, and once you've seen it, it's dazzled you. That's it. And it's natural for you to keep being drawn into it. But it's a moth to the flame. That is a disastrous figure that is going to lead to a disastrous job. If that builder runs out of money on your project, you are going to have to find another builder to replace them. But you're also going to end up with some form of legal dispute with them. And that, again, as I say, I've seen just countless amounts of time in my work with the Federation of Master Builders, and it is disastrous. It has cost people so much time and energy, and you see the letters people have written to the builder or to the Federation or to us as a panel. They've had their hearts broken in two by the upshot of what's happened, because people have got their hopes and dreams and ideals wrapped up into this project, and it's just been smashed in two by a really bad purchase essentially. So you've got a responsibility as a buyer to really consider those low figures, and I would say disconsider them, remove them from your mind very early on. It's harder when there's a neater spread to avoid the cheaper one. I understand that if there's, say, 4 prices and there's only a £10,000 split between, say, 60 and 70, then maybe the cheaper one is okay to consider. But when it's starkly cheaper than the others, run a mile from it. It is only going to lead to heartbreak later on.
Yeah, they're buying the job, they're cutting corners, that sort of thing could well be the case, can't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Payment terms. That's always an interesting one. What do you think are fair payment terms for different sizes of project?
Yeah, so it's very hard for a client to manage that process. So I should explain how we do it, because it's a good system that it removes the question marks around it. But the builder is always incentivized to overclaim for the works completed. So that helps their cash flow, because the one thing that really kills builders is cash flow. They're trying to outlay for lots of different things and then seeing quite a slow drip of money coming back in. And they'll often, won't have large resources and finances to support that in the meantime. And that's quite a common problem. It's quite hard for builders to access finance because unfortunately, because so many of them go pop. So the banks and the lenders don't particularly like them. So what happens is they'll try and take more money out of the project before it's really due, and the client might not have the technical expertise to realise that's what's happening until it gets too late. So on a £200,000 project, it might get towards the end of the job. The client quite clearly can then recognise there might be 30% left of the works, but there's only 10% left of the money, for example. That's when a builder is incentivized to walk off that project if there's disputes and brewing towards the end of the project. So it's very difficult to monitor it, but what you can ask for is valuations to be raised, and that's how we cope with it. So that 150 to 200 items is reproduced as a valuation once a month. We set as a target to ask for money. So we'll say, right, we've completed 68% of item 1 and 0% of item 76 and 12% of item 112 or something, and that whole document will self-total it up. It'll also have any of the additional or omitted costs listed at the bottom of that document. So at least once a month, all of that stuff is going in and telling you what the project total now is after all those variations have happened. And that's really important because the client doesn't want to run out of money at the end of the project, especially if it went over budget in the ground at a very early stage. So a detailed valuation helped by having a detailed schedule of works in the first place, of course. If there isn't one, can be harder. Or you could ask for a surveyor or somebody to come in and do a valuation. You might spend £1,000 or so having a surveyor come in and just check over the payment demands each month that they're raised. As an example, if they're being raised monthly, the builder may say weekly or whatever they might ask for. But it'd be better to say at least monthly, I would say. If a builder's asking for money every week, they probably haven't got the capital to complete your project. But if you ask at least once a month and you paid somebody, say, maybe £1,000, maybe even less, or a professional surveyor to check that over, an expert opinion, if you aren't technically competent yourself, would be a really good way to make sure it's never overvalued, because they would issue a rebuttal to that contractor and say, you've really overclaiming here. You need to, I think this is only 50% complete, so you won't be getting any more money. Well, that will really stop that going wrong later on for that client. So it could be money really well spent to avoid a conflict, especially if there's any uncertainty about the quality of the contractor or their ability to complete the work. So.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the job now, and the contractor said, "Yep, I think everything's done, mate. Perhaps you'd like to pay me your final payment." So how would you go about making sure that the works are complete to the necessary standards to warrant the final payments? What should be the process to do that?
Yeah, so leading on from that, that way of working, if you've employed a third party essentially check it for you, that's the obvious choice. Of course, they're going to complete some form of final inspection for you. If the project's not overly large and you've gone solo on that element of it, then have a good look at the work yourself, and don't be shy about raising issues. The contractor can quite easily say, well, that's actually completely normal, that's what we'd expect. Shrinkage is a brilliant example of this. You can complete beautiful, we've built oak frame houses and things, and we all know, and we're telling the client from day one, they are going to shrink, they're going to move, you might be able to get your fingers down the side of the staircase in a year's time. That's not a massive defect, and a good contractor will factor that into their profit margins and allow some time. So that particular house, an oak frame one we've built, we've just been back there a year after we built it for a day and a bit, just doing bits and pieces. So that's fine if if it's factored in and that we can afford to do it, then that's the way to look after it. But don't be afraid to ask about those things. Don't be afraid to check whether something is a defect or not. If they say nothing that you've raised is a defect, they're probably lying. There probably is going to be a defect. It's very hard. These building projects are thousands of decisions made by multiple people coming together. Things will go wrong. It's almost a guarantee that some things will go wrong. It's about how the person puts those right is a measure of the company and the people you're dealing with. So don't be afraid to ask those questions, and you can phrase them in a nice fashion if you're worried about the quality of the relationship, if falling down, and having that loyalty from the builder to come back and sort things later. Of course, you don't want to fall out about it, but you don't want to be fobbed off either if there is genuine concerns. And don't release all the monies till you really are happy. And if you're really not certain, and there's uncertainty about the quality of the work or the answers you're getting back from the builder, then do look at third parties. There's plenty of surveyors and builder consultants like myself that will come out and help people when they're stuck in that scenario, and we'll give you advice about whether you're in the right or wrong at that time. But independent advice is there's no other way of doing it properly if that's the way the project is going. But if you've got complete faith in the builder and they're giving you good answers and sorting these problems out, then you shouldn't need to worry about that side of things.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess in some cases there'll be a formal warranty on some works. Others, then I guess it's down, as you say, to the relationship and the fact that you've got recourse to the Federation of Builders if there's a problem discovered later or something.
So there's a few different things to consider with warranties, but the good relationship is a good start, because if you've got a very good relationship with that person, they're always going to come back. And if they're an honourable company, they're going to honour their guarantees, and it doesn't matter whether it's in a year's time or 10 years' time. If they feel it's a defect because of a material or workmanship issue, they're going to come back and look after you. That said, that's not a substitute for a written warranty or guarantee. You should expect to receive one, especially if it was detailed in the original quotation. You should get a document that actually says it's guaranteed for X amount of years. And I would keep that safe, because you may want to transfer it to a new owner when they purchase the house, or it is an important thing. And quite regularly they will ask you to produce it. We've had an instance recently where something we did 7 years ago with a fairly newfangled material was supposed to last 20 years, and it failed after 7. It took us 6 and a bit months, and it ended up with a threat of legal action from us against the manufacturer of this material, who are still trading but not selling this particular product anymore, interestingly. Before they actually responded. They are now paying for all of the materials and nearly all of the labour, and we're just supplying a bit of scaffold and assistance, really, to completely replace the entire roof or multiple roofs across an eco house that we built. And we were always on the client side from day one. We felt there was something wrong, but it's obviously hard work for us, and there's no money in it for us. We've lost thousands of pounds on that process, but the loyalty to the customer and the honourable approach sees it through. But that manufacturer only responded finally when we did dig out the formal written guarantee that they had signed in response to our paperwork that we had sent them. So, and that really forced their hand. So there's no supplement for good paperwork, really. And there are insurance-backed warranties that people may want to consider as well. So that's a separate thing. An insurance-backed warranty is essentially a guarantee that is backed by an insurance company should the contractor cease trading. So that could be they've retired, they've sold the business to somebody else who's not interested in helping, or in some other way their legal responsibility has been diminished, whether they've closed or reopened under another company name, the sort of Phoenix company issue we see in the building trade. And that insurance-backed warranty should step in at that point. So should that contractor not be able to help you, you should be able to call upon the policy to help you. So that's often worth having. They're normally about 0.5% of the overall total of the project is about the value of that kind of insurance policy, and you can ask a contractor to provide it. And if you're that way inclined or concerned, you should ask for one.
Great, thanks for that. So we've talked about some scary stuff now. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that, like a particular job that you've had some significant success, something that's really noticeable, you're really proud of? It'd be nice to hear a positive, nice story to finish on the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've got lots of lovely jobs that we're very, very proud of, and they're with lots of really lovely clients as well. So we're particularly keen on partnering up with people that we really like. So before I'll even start on a large domestic project, I'll pretty much sit and drink coffee with the clients and talk through aims and ideals before I even get to what the building is technically. So we've had some really, really good experiences recently with that approach. We've got a couple of different projects on at the moment, both in really amazing areas of outstanding natural beauty. So we've got one that's like a beach house up on the cliffs, which has got an amazing view to die for. Another one up on the downs with we've got two on the downs at the moment, but both have just amazing complete views. One's got 270-degree views of where you can see all the way down to you can see the cliffs at Seaford, then you can run all the way up through the Ouse Valley and see right away to you can see the castle in Lewis on the other side of the building, and just to die for. Absolutely beautiful places to be and lovely places to work. If that's your office for 6 months, and that's not no bad thing really. So we've had with the first few days of the project in Eastbourne, up on the cliffs, where we've got this amazing one-off house, which most people don't even know is there. It's so well hidden away. No one sat in their vans and read the paper at 10 o'clock tea break, as they normally would go and grab the paper and take 10 minutes for a coffee. Everyone just sat and put a chair out and looked at the views for just to sit and watch the sun gleaming off the sea. So that's very nice. Nice to be working in such pretty places. On the completed project side, we had a lovely oak frame house I mentioned earlier, which was really, really nice. That the owners owned a nursery on the garden nursery on site, and also their mother lived in the manor house next door. And we took an old tennis pavilion and demolished it and turned it into an amazing house. It was a really run down old tennis pavilion that wasn't, and they were living in it, but it wasn't really suitable or habitable. Built a beautiful house. There's loads of really technical things. It's built into the trees essentially. So it's all a piled foundation with a reinforced ring beam. All the tree roots had to be protected. So we built different systems on top of them before we even came in with the diggers and everything to start work. Really complicated, difficult jobs, which I really enjoy personally. The engineering side, if it's difficult and needs lots of thought, then it keeps us interested. And I wouldn't want to do the same run-of-the-mill new build houses day in, day out, because that just doesn't challenge you mentally. So that's a really good example. And the clients are so lovely, and when we finished and so happy, and they've presented us with beautiful photograph albums of the whole process of the timber frame arriving, of us all on site at different times. And
that's nice. Yeah.
It's been really lovely. So yes, that's a particular one, but there's dozens going back many years of lots of lovely finished jobs, and but it's the people you remember, I think, as well as the houses as well.
Yeah, that's when you really get the reward, the good feel factor at the end of the job.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I probably could speak for all builders and roofers, and it's nice to be thanked. If someone really has enjoyed what you've done and they say thank you, it goes a long way. There's plenty of people that assume because they're paying that the relationship doesn't extend to a thank you, but it's more than that. It's you're building relationships. We're spending 12 months or more with people. We really get to know each other, and it means a lot really to have those good relationships and end up. And we've had barbecues thrown for us, parties at completion, where all the blokes come back and we all go and have a beer and a chat with the clients and a catch up. I think that's really nice. It makes it worthwhile, and it shows that what you're doing means something to people, which is good.
That's lovely. That's a lovely story. Thanks for that. Well, Ben, I think we've taken up an awful amount of your time. Really appreciate that. I find our discussions really enlightening and helpful, and hopefully the listeners do too as well. How would any be best to make contact with you and CRB?
Yeah, so CRB website is www.crbcontractors.co.uk. Our email address, should anyone want to contact us directly, is info@crbcontractors.co.uk. And on the building consultancy side, where we do our surveying work and look after people purchasing houses and look after people that are stuck in horrible disputes and things, that company is called Clear Surveys, which is www.clearsurveys.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Once again, it was superb. I'm sure we'll have opportunity to discuss some other works in the future, and particularly interested in the Federation of Master Builders. That could be an interesting topic.
So there's lots of interesting stories there, definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, Ben, well, I shall let you get back to your family. Thank you very much once again. And to all our listeners, I'll just say, remember, save money and buy smart. Goodbye.